One. Welcome to another CEO Wisdom podcast with Isvari Maranwe. She is CEO at Yuvoice. She's an award-winning cyber and tech attorney with 300K plus followers as a political analyst and influencer. Am I getting that right, Isvari?
Yes, yes.
Nice. And you've done a bunch of companies. Dweebs Global. You're an author as well. LinkedIn Global Goodwill Ambassador. So we're gonna get into all of that later on in the podcast today. This pod is presented to you by podbuy.com. If you want to start, scale, or monetize your own podcast, you can go to podbuyer.com. So Isvari, welcome to the podcast. Tell me a bit more about yourself and what are you up to nowadays?
Yeah, so thank you for having me, Charles. I really appreciate it. I'm currently the CEO of Yuvoice, and we are really focusing on launching our platform and scaling. We currently have an incredible editorial where you can read stories from around the world, people who are sharing their voices. And that's really how we got started. And in the wake of the chaos that we currently see on current social media when it comes to outrage, loneliness, addiction, and generally not very healthy and productive conversations, we have decided to create and launch a social platform that focuses on social good. And one of the most incredible parts about what we're doing is we figured out a way to reward people online for the tangible impact they make in the real world instead of likes or content. So we're not a content creator platform. We're really returning to the essence of truly social, truly media content online.
I love that. So you started as a researcher, then I see policy analyst, legal extern for the U.S. Department of State. You also had a TEDx talk or TED conference talk. So tell us about you, like who you are and why you chose that career path precisely.
Yeah, it's a great question. So as you notice, it's kind of a lot of different things. And I've always been very, very passionate about being a polymath, I guess is the word people use nowadays, Renaissance man or woman, whatever. And I think the reason is because there's so much of this world that's fascinating to me, that's absolutely incredible. And it always breaks my heart that everybody doesn't have the same ability to enjoy it. And so I left physics and I left some of the stuff that I was doing in the past because I wanted to be able to make more of an impact in the world. And that's why I became an attorney. And then that's why I sort of launched, co-founded the nonprofit before this one, which was helping mentor people around the world. And now this one to really push a new tech solution that helps everybody make the kind of change that I've been privileged to make. So yeah, that's probably the common theme through everything is I've been really driven to try and figure out the best ways to make a tangible difference, not just talk about it.
Right. And at some point, I think you found that being a founder and an entrepreneur was the quickest path to have the impact that you wanted to have on this earth, right?
Yeah, it's a great point. So I think it for me, and I always recommend this to other founders as well, right? Is like, is there a market, right? Is this something that needs to be created new? And it's always sad almost when there is something that needs to be done new, because like, why doesn't this already exist? Why haven't people already come up with this great solution? And that's how you know that you have something. So for me, it was less the desire to be a founder or entrepreneur. I actually love working in more traditional environments. I was a government attorney before this, and I actually enjoyed it. I think it's more that the solutions that we had and the need that was in the market just wasn't being met by current solutions. And so someone had to do it. And so that's what drove me to become a founder and an entrepreneur. It wasn't a necessarily innate desire to like leave the system or start something on my own or anything like that.
And why Big Social isn't doing that? Why isn't Facebook making the environment more healthy, the online environment more healthy?
Yeah, so actually, I think it boils down to the impact of advertising and for-profit on current social media. Social media currently struggles with figuring out how to balance the interests between investors and the people who want to make a profit from shares on TikTok or Twitter or LinkedIn or whatever, right? And also big companies that want to advertise and want to make money off of the platform. And then obviously creators who want to make money off of the platform. So all of these big money interests do not balance well if what you actually care about is user experience, user feedback, and making sure it's a healthy environment for users, right? You want to sell data, you want to sell ads, you want to sell outrage because it sells clicks. And if you are motivated by those for-profit reasons, then these problems continue to crop up. So what we do differently is, one, we are nonprofit owned and managed, so we don't have the same interests. And second, we've just thought about ways to be sustainable in the long term without selling out to large advertisers or selling out on the fundamental ethics and the fundamental human right we feel that everybody deserves to have online, a free space for them to talk and be heard.
Right. And tell me, like, yeah, for someone that is not in the US system, like how toxic it is nowadays to interact on social medias, and how are some actors taking advantage of that for power and money?
Yeah, it's a really good point. It's a huge issue in the United States and abroad. You have companies like Facebook or X that have in the past worked with the US government to target certain, content. And in general, they will say, hey, we're just there to notice terrorists, or we're there to talk about bad actors, but we want that information turned over to the government. We have TikTok, which in many, many ways has been used as an arm of the Chinese government to collect massive amounts of data from around the world. So you have the impact of big government. Then you have the impact of advertisers, which is a really potentially big problem. And the way that money and the ability for that money to impact the feed has resulted in companies like Facebook being accused of like interfering in the 2016 election. And this is because big money, once you allow big money to come in, a government like Russia could spend that big money or that influence to come in and impact what you're seeing on your feeds. And because they sell based on clicks and likes, they know that outrageous content, even racist content, sexist content, that sells clicks and likes. It sells eyeballs. People want to rage comment on it, or they want to support it. And as a result, it's really increasing a lack of critical thinking on current social media. Meanwhile, if they put fact checkers in there, if there's community notes, if there's a more reasonable feed, they're not maybe seeing the output that they want. They're not seeing the profit that they want. And so this problem just continues. I also think a lot of it is, unfortunately, the people who've bought out current social media. You're seeing a lot of more unethical billionaires think about how they can turn the platform to support their own interests instead of keeping it a free and open environment for everyone.
Right. I love Musk as an entrepreneur, but seems he's very, very clumsy in the social field. And tell me why politics and governing people is not necessarily the same as managing a business.
Yeah, it's definitely not. I mean, I think there's similarities between effectively running like the admin state, right? Like thinking about how to motivate your employees, picking a very strong team of, say, cabinet secretaries, or those cabinets picking great deputy secretaries and building out a functioning government. I think lots of that part of it can be similar to being a CEO of a large company, if you are the one doing the managing. So like a lot of what has come to light about Elon Musk or Donald Trump or other billionaires in politics is they're not actually the ones doing the managing at their companies. In fact, a lot of the people at their companies work around them, or there are staffers who manage all of that for them, who do the people management. So even the skills that would be similar among the business sector and the governing sector are not the skills that these sort of famous billionaires you hear about are actually practicing. So when you look at billionaires who've built things from scratch, like Bill Gates or Mark Cuban, like, I mean, of course, they have their own privileges and their own assets. I'm not saying it's completely from scratch, but they have managed teams, or they have been more involved in business. They also generally tend to have more nuanced political or social opinions because they have experienced different types of growth in their business, and they know at least what makes efficiency work, right? So, you have a lot of research to show that economically speaking, a lot of Kamala Harris's policies are better for the economy, but there's an illusion that it's not, because you can like come in with these zing words as a billionaire. The reason a lot of traditional billionaires are supporting what looks like policies that don't actually align with their interests is because they don't want an unstable market. And that comes from actually being involved in the day-to-days of business operations and the day-to-days of business managing. Whereas when you look at someone like Elon Musk, as he hasn't really experienced that, and he's made some pretty bad business decisions like buying out X, which has fallen in stock value considerably, et cetera, he's not as good at thinking about, okay, what is the business impact? What's the economic impact of these policies and these decisions? He's so used to having an idea and having everyone coalesce around him and say, okay, you're a genius, we're going to do it for you.
Is it dangerous to re-elect Trump? Because, yeah, one would mention that during his presidency, like nothing terrible happened to the world. Like, what would it mean for this guy to be re-elected?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think it's especially dangerous around the entire world. The kind of rise in fascism we're seeing is terrifying. I don't think it's US specific, and I don't think it's Donald Trump specific. Obviously, there's a lot of fear in Western Europe about the fact that, Trump has said he will not support, sort of the fight in Ukraine, or he might withdraw from NATO, which we're talking about long-term world security, world order type things that have, in general, lasted a really long time at this point and have contributed to a stable global economy. And a lot of economists are worried about a massive recession if he does things like that, pulls out of NATO, his economic policies. We have the other issue, obviously, social justice issues aside, right? Trump is bad for women or minorities or race. We also have the issue that it's really hard to predict what he's going to do. And that makes an unstable market. It makes a volatile market. The economy was really bad under Trump, but then, of course, part of that was the pandemic, right? And the fears around the pandemic. And so will he sustain the current economic growth we're seeing, or are things going to regress and go back? Will he have no impact on the economy? That's also a possibility. And the economy notwithstanding, right? The impact that he's had to women, to people of color, their safety, rise of neo-Nazism, which is a major issue, and just kind of the open racism, I think, creates a lot of instability and negativity and harm to a lot of people. So just yesterday at a rally, right, like his rallies are using a lot of language that's, making fun of Latinos or calling Puerto Rico an island of garbage, or, mocking Black people, saying we should slaughter political opponents. Like that sort of language creates lasting impacts. Like even if it's a joke, even if it's a rally, right, that sort of language can create lasting impacts that adds to global instability. And I do think still a lot of countries around the world look at America as a leader. So if they see the rise in fascism here, it can perpetuate a rise in fascism elsewhere. And we see that in Hungary, we see it in Venezuela, et cetera.
I just think that most humans think in economic terms and in capitalist term, and we cannot get rid of that thinking in us. It starts with finances and money, and then most of our, like 95% of our decisions come from there. And most people, some people that I admire as entrepreneurs, they vote for Trump because he would be better economically. Is that a good argument to make, to vote for someone? If they take care of the economy, they pretty much take care of everything?
Yeah, so 2 points, right? Number one, I don't think that it's a good idea to vote for like just whether or not your personal economics are going to be better, right? And Trump is provably worse for a lot of poorer people in the country. He's worse for middle income people. He's worse for people starting small businesses. For example, Kamala Harris's proposals and Biden's proposals in general have really supported small business growth with small business tax cuts. Kamala Harris has proposed an additional small business tax cut, et cetera. So what if you're not somebody who is in that category, however, right? You're like, Trump's better for my economics. I'm like, okay, but you do need to care about the other people in your country. For example, Trump wants to get rid of all undocumented immigrants. Economists have predicted if you do that, there will be a major shortfall in Social Security, because right now they're paying billions of dollars into Social Security every year that they're not withdrawing. And unfortunately, we will run out of Social Security money by 2030 if we don't have that funding. So like what actually happens? This is back to that whole thing on like practically running a government. You have to actually look at the numbers. You have to be able to, it doesn't help to just talk about these buzzwords or make these racist or xenophobic comments. You actually have to talk about like the actual impact. You're going to have to deal with that when you're in office. The second point is that Trump isn't actually better for the economy. Like a whole bunch of independent economists, Republican economists, traditional Republicans have pointed out that, unfortunately, although Republicans used to be the party of the economy, right, and they used to run on the economy, sadly, that's just not the case anymore. And that's actually a big loss. Like a lot of capitalists are now included in the Democratic Party, all the way from the far left progressive pro-socialist wing to traditional capitalists are in the Democratic Party now, because Trump was so bad for the economy and it was so volatile. When you look at billions of people and around the world and the economic impact of a Trump administration, you look at the fact that millions of jobs have been created in the United States. The vast majority of those have been under Democratic administrations. So there's now ample evidence to show that actually a Kamala Harris administration would be stronger for the economy than a Trump administration. Rhetoric aside, right? Like there's actual in-depth research about this. And so again, that's why you see a lot of folks like Mark Cuban or Bill Gates, who are very, very wealthy and have grown that wealth for themselves, supporting Harris when you wouldn't expect that traditionally. And it literally is about global economic stability and concrete policies that are largely better for Wall Street.
Talking about Gates, you've probably seen all these conspiracy theories with that guy, and that seems to be in growth. People inventing stories that fit their narrative. Can you speak as per that phenomenon?
Yeah, I mean, I think, it kind of goes back to the whole thing on current social media. It's really hard for people to fact check. So you have a lot of deep fake spreading. You have a lot of conspiracy theories spreading. You have really great influencers who come out and say things with conviction, with absolutely no research. And so people believe them. I think it happens with every powerful person. We've seen conspiracy theories about Beyonce. We've seen conspiracy theories about Taylor Swift. Bill Gates is a famous person. There's going to be conspiracy theories about him. I think that he and, his ex-wife have frequently come out and spoken about their foundation and what they are hoping to achieve with it. They have tried to be pretty public about what it is they're doing. It comes with conspiracy theories, but I also think that there's a lot of reputable news sources and fact-based ways to check their claims, their impact, what they're doing, how much money they have, what they're donating to. So I don't find it as fascinating, I would say. I know there's a lot of conspiracy theories out there, but I think, a lot of people start doing it because it's fun and then they forget about the impact. I'm very committed to fact-based news and reputable journalism. And I do think Bill Gates has been a victim of conspiracy theories, but I also think he has the power and ability to fight back in a way that some people don't.
As someone that speaks her truth, do you often get backlash for what you have to say online, and how do you deal with hate yourself?
Yeah, it's a great question. I don't really care about it anymore. I think that no matter what you can literally, and I think, I mentioned the Israel-Palestinian conflict frequently when people talk about this, because you could say nothing and get hate. You could say, you could support Israel and get hate, of course. You could support Palestine and get hate. People have been fired for saying nothing, for supporting Israel, for supporting Palestine. People have gotten attacked and boycotted for every shade of thing that they could say. And so I always bring that up to point out that at some point you have to realize everybody is online. Everybody is sharing their opinions online. The online world is the real world. We are long past the ability to be like, it doesn't matter. It matters. So if you act with integrity and you speak your truth online and you're convinced that you're right, go ahead and do it. You will find people who will support you and who believe in what you're believing. And I think it's really important to fight for justice when it isn't easy. I'm in a position of privilege to be able to speak out largely safely. I live in a country that isn't going to punish me for criticizing the government. I generally have the finances to not rely on what I say on social media. I'm not monetizing my followers. That's not what pays food on the table, right? So, given that my position of relative privilege and security, I do think it's my duty to speak out for people who may not have a voice or may not have the ability to do that.
Why do people hate and get angry and take such strong stances online? And what is the right approach to dialogue, cooperation, and potentially getting value out of a conversation with a stranger?
Yeah, no, it's a great question, because I do think people frequently are so much more vitriolic and rude online than they would ever be in real life. There's this phenomenon you see, especially on TikTok, where people will look at a video and then respond in ways they would never do in real life, specifically by being like, I'm specifically upset that you're happy about this thing because I am not in that situation, or this doesn't apply to me. How dare you? In real life, we understand not everything applies to us, and we're capable of being excited for other people who are happy, being polite, knowing boundaries, and we forget that online. And I think it's because on some platforms, especially like TikTok or Twitter, Reddit comes to mind, you can hide behind some level of anonymity, and people don't associate their comments and their videos and their content with the real person they are. On a platform like LinkedIn, you see a lot less of it, because people on LinkedIn associate their online profile with their business persona and with who they are in real life. So one way to combat it, obviously, is thinking about incentivizing people to use their real names and identities, creating content that reflects themselves, and encouraging them to have conversations like they would with someone face to face. The second thing is that a lot of research shows that talking to people about issues and talking to them about facts and leading from a place of empathy, talking about hey, I'm in this situation. Do you really believe X, Y, Z? Do you really believe that you want me to suffer, or you don't want me to have rights, or things like that, does change opinions and is a more effective way to fight racism and sexism, rather than, necessarily shouting at the other side. But again, back to what we were talking about before, that's not what the algorithm incentivizes. It's much more fun to have outrageous screaming matches to have witty, sarcastic, rude, or outrageous comments that go viral. And so we really need to think about incentivizing the right type of behavior we want to see online if we want to see that change. I don't think it's users' faults. Like, I've seen incredibly patient people go online and rage because that's what we use online for. It's our space to vent. And while I think that safe spaces are really important and a space to vent is really important, I would hope that's not a town square where you're meant to try and change opinion and have honest conversations about things.
So interesting, the fact that us humans were warriors, we love to watch people fight but not be involved, right? That's very much part of our weakness, right? It's like they're both losing and I'm winning, just watching here and having popcorn and laughing. So it's a bit sad how social media has leveraged that algorithm. Do you see an actual social media that is factual based, or maybe not even a social media? Nowadays, I'm just spending my time chatting with AIs and trying to get my facts from there. Still reading Wikipedia, which is still better than most things out there. What would be the best product, the best user experience for such a product, for people like me that want the truths, the facts, and just to grow their brain and not to give out to temptations?
Yeah, so this is literally the question that motivates all of the research we're doing at Yuvoice pre-launch, right? How do we create a platform that doesn't create the same problems over and over again? And a lot of it boils down to not rewarding people for likes and comments. And I think that is a very fundamental part of current social media, because social media today isn't about getting to know real people and having a real relationship with them. It's about content creator media. How many likes and clicks can you have? How large can you build your brand? That's great. There's a place for that. That place is current social media, but there's no space that goes back to the traditional elements of social media, which is about social relationships and honest media, right? And so that is something we are really exploring. In answer to like where I get my news today, I honestly continue to look at a combination of sources, kind of like you. Wikipedia tends to be pretty well fact-checked on average. It is more accurate than the average encyclopedia. The BBC and AP continue to have great on-the-ground journalism and news coverage. It's always useful to like read op-eds or takes or even news from, let's say, the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal or the Washington Post and then Al Jazeera, who come from very different perspectives. But, I think at this point, all of those, I don't know that they can truly be considered unbiased or unpartisan or real media. I get a lot of news from Reddit, breaking news. There's a lot of people who fact check things in Reddit comments. There's a lot that you can get on TikTok. You just have to know who to trust and whose viewpoints you want to consider. And I think, as always, I encourage everybody to take classes in basic statistics and logical reasoning and fact, because people fall into the same logical traps over and over again. Absolutism, whataboutism, strawmanning arguments, not being able to understand basic economic theory or social justice theory, not having had an education about the history of, let's say, slavery or the slave trade, about the impact of immigration. You see a lot of people talk about issues that literally do not matter because they're buzz topics, or not understanding the actual impact of policies on the issues that they care about. So, I always encourage people to take classes in that. I mean, even those of us who had a bespoke college education may not have taken them. And so it's worth doing that as an adult. It makes a huge difference.
Do you think totalitarian leaders should go for freedom of speech? And is there such a thing as taking freedom of speech too far, like Elon seems to do with X?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I think the criticisms of Elon Musk on Twitter are that like he hasn't actually like allowed freedom of speech, and that he is suppressing voices he disagrees with. For example, the word cisgender is banned, but he's just kind of creating a right-wing bubble, and then you have left-wing bubbles that ban other things. I do think we have the paradox of intolerance, right? If you create a place that is completely free speech and people can call Black people the N-word, they can insult trans people, they can criticize immigrants, they can share rape threats or death threats, right? And I've seen those on social media being a creator, then you're going to end up silencing a bunch of voices that should be heard because they feel unsafe and they're going to leave your platform, or they're being threatened or harassed and that's not fair and they're going to leave your platform. And so in order to build a truly tolerant space, sometimes you do have to keep out voices that are actually going to make this place less tolerant. Because if you allow everybody to share their stuff, you're actually creating some sort of minority that's going to end up feeling infringed. There's a huge difference between that, an online company creating a space where everybody can feel free, and the government punishing people for their opinions. So no matter how vile people's opinions are, I am very American in that I do feel like people have the right to speak out without the government, punishing them for it, whether that's jail time, whether that's, a fine. I don't think the government should punish people for what they say. And so that type of free speech, I do really support. I do think it's different when you're creating a platform, you're a company, you're deciding who's speaking on your platform. You want a safe space for people to be able to share their viewpoints. That's going to mean banning harassment, banning rape threats, banning death threats, things like that.
Right. Do you feel democracy can reach a summit? For example, I think a lot of people are taking advantage of the fact that democracy can be manipulated with social media and all of that. Do you think democracy has scaled to its limit, or that is just not the problem?
I think democracy is, only as good as we can keep it. And if you have voters who have been intentionally undereducated and disenfranchised for generations, it's happening in the United States, it's happening in other countries around the world, you're going to have perverse outcomes. In the US, for example, we have a lot of gerrymandering, we have voter suppression. A friend of mine actually just had her ballot, like she registered to vote and she got kicked. There's massive disenfranchisement right now going on in the US. There's lawsuits about it where Black voters, Hispanic voters are getting kicked off of rolls. You have intentional disinformation campaigns about not educating children about the history of the US so that they vote in ways that you want, right? All of these things impact a democracy. If you have one person, one vote, or if you have a representative democracy nonetheless, that's not a pure democracy, and it's easily controllable by the media, by people who have incentives they want to win. They're willing to undereducate people to achieve it. Those are threats we see happening worldwide. And we also see the rise of identity politics, because in a global world, which is happening right now, globalization, everybody who is very passionate about their race or their religious identity is feeling under threat, because they feel like that is weakening in a global world where they are consistently confronting other races and other cultures. And that also feeds into a rise of fascism worldwide. That's why we see totalitarian dictators gaining in power everywhere. Brown, white, Black, like this is just happening around the world. And it's not good for the people who live there. Like, obviously, there's tons of statistics about how terrible living under totalitarian or fascist regimes are. But I don't think that democracy as a system is failing. I think it's what it always has been. The question is, do we as voters continue to fight for it, or do we risk banana republics, rise in fascism, rise in corporate control of the government, and things like that? And I'm waiting on the edge of my seat, as are we all, to see what happens.
And what about having experts get more power in our systems, not pure technocracies, but more of that? And I keep turning back to AI, not as an AI supremacist, but maybe a maximalist. I believe that AI will actually save us from our human nature. What do you feel about, more experts in power and potentially having powerful technology to crunch that data and make a decision on their behalf?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of potentially very large harm that AI can do, right? Like, I hope you're right. I hope that AI is going to be more benevolent than negative, and that AI will be used appropriately, and that when AI inevitably is able to control the global market and has the data analytics control and ability to make independent decisions, that it's making the correct decisions. Right now, I'm not convinced about that, right? Like, being from the Bay Area myself, I've seen what unfettered lack of regulation can create, both in tech companies and in AI specifically. And, when it comes to artificial intelligence, when you have no guardrails, and when artificial intelligence is getting trained on human data that can be incredibly biased, can be racist, can be sexist, can be pro-fascist, we don't actually know yet, that is not going to necessarily be healthy, right? Now, of course, that's not to say that good things cannot happen. Like, I hope you're right. I hope good things happen. The question is, how do we train it? How do we continue using it? How do we grow and have guardrails in place for how we use it until we know that we can trust it? In terms of having experts run the government, I mean, I think that's a little bit kind of what we have in America, in that you elect, parliamentary systems like this too. You're electing people who represent your city or your state, or you're electing people who are going to represent your interests, and then they're getting together and making decisions. There is really no true democracy or country where everybody is just voting on every single policy and then it gets carried out. That's impossible. We're electing experts to make decisions on our behalf. The question is, how much do we continue to do that? How much do we retain power on behalf of individual rights or individual people? Who are those experts? How are they elected? How are they selected? At this point, are we selecting people too arbitrarily? Is there too much power to governors or to states? Is there too much power to the federal government? Like, those are all the nitty-gritty questions of running a democracy. I don't think the answer is to give up and turn into an oligarchy. We already kind of do elect experts. The question is, are those experts elected by individual people? Are they chosen by big business? So that's sort of, I think, where we're at.
Right. On your side, how do you make your money nowadays, and how do you make sure that it doesn't affect your thinking? How do you make sure that it doesn't induce bias into your social actions?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think above all, I don't care if I think at all points I have the privilege to be able to not care if I quote unquote lose my job. And I think that allows me to speak freely. And it is a huge privilege. And it is one I do not take for granted. And it's why I do feel it's my duty to speak out. There are people who made the decision to speak out in favor of, like, let's say, ending the genocide in Gaza, and they lost their job over it. And they still did that, right? That's an even bigger challenge, I can imagine, right? If you feel very strongly about something, you speak out about it, but you know your job can be on the line. That's amazing. And I did that. I've done things similar to that when I've worked at companies before, or even the government, where I have fought for social issues I care about, even knowing that it would impact potentially my job. But I don't expect everybody to do that, because for some people that's food on the table. That's whether or not they can clothe and feed their kids, etc. So, end of the day, the way I stand by this is I have the privilege to not be reliant on my voice. I'm not reliant on my influence or on people buying my newsletter or supporting me. I'm not reliant on any one stream of income, and that allows me to be able to speak freely. As an attorney, I also have a really, really great career to fall back on. I'm always able to get a job as an attorney, and attorneys represent everybody, and that's our job, right? Our job is, even if somebody is really terrible, if you're their attorney, you have to represent your client, because everybody deserves a legal defense. Everybody deserves an attorney if they need one. And so it is possible always for me to become an attorney, go back to being an attorney in my day job, join a law firm, or like represent clients, or, represent the public good that way. So I think it's really just a position of privilege. There's mental health that goes into it, right? Like, if you're more of an anxious person, you're probably not going to deal with the hate as much. I used to be more sensitive. I learned to get over that, right? So all of those things I see as privileges that allow me to speak my mind.
And do you feel that most influencers are biased by that? It's the money speaking, and it's not really them or them wanting to do good. It's just like them wanting to make money.
Yeah, I don't think most influencers speak about social justice, actually. And that's why, because then you might turn off a brand, you might turn off a brand deal, you might lose audience members. You just might be scared that, I don't want to do the work to think about this or talk about it, because then potentially I will lose fans and following and stuff like that. And that's why we see with big influencers and even big celebrities, they frequently don't say anything until it comes to the point where it looks worse if they say nothing. Taylor Swift comes to mind. There's influencers who've been canceled on TikTok for not saying anything, right? Then they will say something, and it will usually be as vague and centrist as possible. So again, they're not losing fans or a following. And again, they feel they have to, because that's what puts food on the table. Their entire income is based on their influence. And I think that can be dangerous. I think it's great for some people. Content creator media, like I said, it's great for some people. But the minute it becomes your job, the minute it becomes your main source of income, it obviously controls what you can and cannot say, unless you're truly very, very brave and very self-sacrificing.
And what's superhero branding, and what do you have to say about PR done the old way vs the new way? Is it ethical to paint yourself as something to get more cash?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I actually, and I think Yuvoice as well, we're a huge believer on, like, there's no reason why good people should be poor, good people shouldn't be successful, or good people should be self-sacrificing, right? Altruism doesn't require you to hurt yourself. And I think we are really thinking about ways to change the incentive structure so good people become rich, good people become famous, good people have power. So we don't look at that as an either or at all. And I think that is something that's very much the new world. In terms of branding around being a good person or branding around an issue. We actually think it's a very, very important thing to do, right? If you're a good business that cares about making an impact in the world, take Patagonia, for example, you want to brand around the impact you're making. It's not because you just care about the money and you want to lie to consumers. In fact, I think consumers are really good today about distinguishing BS from reality. Is this a company that's actually making an impact, or did they just spend $100 million on marketing and $1 million in donations? I think if a company is actually motivated to make change or to associate their brand with a social issue like Nike, Patagonia, they can actually make an impact by doing that. And so I'm a big believer in incentivizing businesses to do that. In fact, recent research shows that over 80% of consumers have started to care about these things, with over like 65% of Gen Z buying on beliefs. And so that's a good thing. That's literally using money as a vote, using it to impact the market. And I think companies should take advantage of that. And I would encourage companies to take advantage of that because it's win-win. If I can convince a company to donate $10 million to a good nonprofit that's changing the world, and it's also increasing the number of people who buy from them, great. So I just want there to be more positives in the world. I do not care about intent as much as impact at all.
So what are your goals for the remainder of this year with Yuvoice as the CEO?
Yeah, it's a great question. So, I mean, what we're doing right now is we are launching creative ways to raise funds, and we are hoping that those are successful. So there's like major funding rounds coming up. I think I'm really excited about that. We're heading into our full public launch next year. So hopefully we will be having a really cool public launch event. So there's a lot of end of the year prep heading into next year for that. There's finishing the development of our product and our product launch, some really great marketing initiatives coming up. So it's just a really exciting time. By the end of the year, I'd say the main thing I'm excited for is that full behind the scenes prototype and pre-public rollout of our app and our product, which we're going through a lot of testing rounds. We are not trying to go viral. So our goal is very much to grow 1,000 users, make sure they love the product, 10,000 users, make sure they love the product, 100,000, etc. We really want a steady, sustained growth with a bunch of people who know they're coming on the platform with their best selves to actually make an impact and change the world. And to do that, we have to grow slowly. If you grow fast, if you grow virally, you lose control of the platform and how it's growing and the types of people you're promoting. And we want to make sure that we always keep in mind our values and our ethics and what we intended the platform to be for.
Nice. Well, thank you for today, Isvari. Where can people find out more about you?
Yuvoice.org is a great place. So you can check out Yuvoice there. And then there's also my website, which is just my first name.com. And we are actually going through a massive revamp of both. So definitely stay tuned because I think there's going to be some really great content and stuff going on there. And then there's obviously the Superhero Bulletin, which is my newsletter. It has over 45,000 subscribers. So feel free to jump on that as well.
With Isvari Maranwe and Charles Cormier.